Today, when some of the world's best Counter-Strike players, they meet in tournaments, it's all organized by a Danish company. A Danish startup company, actually, only 6 or 7 years old. It's called Blast, and that will be this journey this company has taken will be the topic for this session that will last for approximately an hour. If any of you guys have any questions, please pop up and we will make a Q&A at the end. First of all, a very big welcome to you, Nicolas, who will take us on about your journey and the company's journey and who you are and what is Blast and all your ambitions and your vision and stuff like that. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A. So please prepare some questions. There will be lots of time to ask them later on. Welcome to.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Want to jump into, as mentioned, a bit of our journey, a bit of my own journey, broad spectrum esports, where we're at now, where we're going in the future. So you'll be hearing a lot of different things. And again, don't hold back. Seeing as we're not 1,000 people, feel free to also just raise up a hand. If you want to stop somewhere, let's stop somewhere. We'll take it slow. It'll be nice and easy. A little bit about me, Chief Innovation Officer, big swanky title, very boring day job. I just shoot out a lot of emails. A lot of product and experience responsibilities. So I was part of conceptualizing all the events. So that is the format, the structure, what is the broadcast, what does the stage look like, what is our identity. That was my area of responsibility. But it didn't necessarily always start there. This is me on the right with a beer and a skateboard. My parents probably thought I would go nowhere in life. I probably thought so myself as well. Luckily, I at least managed to get somewhere. Made it to here. That feels pretty good. I've always had a pretty strange mindset, I think. As a young man, I never really felt like anything was impossible. And I don't know what led me there. For those who are Danish, might know who Nazi Johnny is. He was a prevalent neo-Nazi in Denmark. I was in the 9th grade. I was writing an assignment about Nazis and neo-Nazism in Denmark. So I called him in 9th grade and figured, what's the worst that can happen? He can say no to being interviewed for my school assignment. He said yes. And I then had to lie to my parents, go on a trip to this Nazi fortress that they had somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And I think that kind of paved the way for my mindset around anything is kind of possible. You just kind of keep on going. Also in 8th grade, kept on calling Snoop Dogg's record label to try to get an interview for my hip-hop assignment in 8th grade. He never picked up the phone. Nazi Johnny did. That became an interview. I still have this tape, and I haven't listened to it yet. I probably should, just because it'll be crazy. I was never great in school, never finished anything. I finished maybe the normal 1 to 9th grade in school. Have no higher learning, but I love video games. I went to the military. I took the train immediately after military service. I went to an internet cafe, for those who remember those. Less of them around today, a lot of them back then. And that's where I spent all my living hours before I then went back to the military. Once that was over, I figured, might as well just stay here. So I worked here for a while, ended up being headhunted to different roles, was part of a television startup that did big shows in Denmark for Danish television about video games. So luckily, this gaming path kind of worked out. Did a lot of television, Did a lot of television, was a host, was a presenter on all sorts of things. As long as it was about video games, I was excited. Ended up doing video productions all over the world, both about gaming, not about gaming. And that led me down this path of being headhunted to the role to a company that at the time was called Refresh. I don't know, what is the general esports knowledge level here? Everyone knows what esports is, right? Show of hands, yeah, or nodding. Okay, great. What I did in the beginning was to start with, figure out, great, we have this team, it's called Astralis. Do everyone know who Astralis is? If you've seen Danish news, I'm sure you've heard about them. Back then, they had won nothing. They were a good team, but they weren't really on a journey yet. So when I joined Third Person Through the Door, we had to start with getting them on their journey, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Once they began winning tournaments, we documented that. We achieved what I'd probably call the curling effect in Denmark. All of a sudden, Counter-Strike became a Danish game. We owned it, like we take ownership over everything else that we hold dear, Danish or not. Same happened with Astralis, and that obviously became quite a wave that crashed into Denmark, and everyone fell in love. When we had peaked with the team and they were winning the biggest tournaments you could win, we always knew that the tournaments themselves could be better. There was a lot of heritage holding it back. That's not necessarily bad, and I'm sure you will have seen this in your jobs if you've been in a place that's existed for a long time. You'll be held back in heritage in people who've been there a long time saying, but that's not how we do things. we do it this way, and it has to happen in these following steps, or everything crashes and burns, right? We kind of took the other approach, like, great, what is going to happen if we don't follow that path, right? Let's throw a hand grenade in everything. And that's kind of what made Blast explode into reality, if you will, no puns intended. So we sat down, looked at the ecosystem, saw, great, there's a lot of very long tournaments. They're very intense to be at as an audience member. They're weeks long, it's hard to follow, it's long hours in an arena. So we boiled that down into a format that was a day and a half in length, from 2 weeks to a day and a half. High intensity, many games at once, in an arena, all the teams playing on stage, complete madness. And that's part of the journey that I'll be digging into now as well. And when we do our big shows, it looks something like this. We've filled arenas all over the world, from Royal Arena in Copenhagen to arenas in Los Angeles, Sao Paulo, and everywhere else you can almost think of. It's big, it's a spectacle. It's probably different than any other sporting event you've probably seen. There's a lot of pyrotechnics, a lot of show. So think of it almost as a concert, a big festival, a sporting event, all clashing together into one, right? That is what I find the beauty of esport events to be. But it didn't always start there. So much like you saw my youth that looked slightly hopeless with a beer and a skateboard back in the young days, this is what early esports looked like. Crazy. This is an actual event I attended back when I was an aspiring player. Don't know what I was aspiring towards, but I just knew I wanted to go pro. What I do want to call out in this series of images is, look at the sponsor placement. D-Link up in the top right corner, that is a peripheral that helps you connect internet to more things. They were getting their money's worth at this event, and more followed. This is what the general hall looked like. You saw the big arenas from before. It's a gymnastics hall in Denmark. I've slept on the tables in Danish gymnastics hall because you didn't want your equipment to be stolen. So that was kind of the mindset you were in. What you see down below the red arrow, that is the main stage. So even the stage I'm on now is bigger than some of the biggest esports stages that we had. Here you'll see me on the far left handing out a prize, 15,000 Danish kroner, that's 2K euro, pretty much. And again, sponsor placement checks out. If you look at Sennheiser, printed out, very nice. That's on the main stage when you play it on the stage. There's a projector shooting slightly awkwardly, sponsors up into the center region of one of the players who won it. That should have gone somewhere else. But again, there were some attempts and at least a desire to want to seem bigger than we were, right? Luckily, we moved past that. At Blast, when we had continued this Astralis journey of building an esports team, now the most winning of all time, we wanted to do the events. And like I said, that was a bit of a roller coaster journey. So this room gives me slight trauma. This was empty. It had white boards everywhere. They were empty. All we knew was that 4 months out, we had booked Royal Arena, one of the largest arenas in Denmark, and we had to put an event there. We didn't know the name, we didn't know the teams, we didn't know anything, the contents that were actually going to happen. Fast forward, we found out. I had this countdown hanging over my table, ominously counting down to the day where we filled the arena, we hoped, with all the teams that came and joined us. And luckily we did. We found the partner teams, we designed an identity that was meant to look different, feel different than anything that was out there in the market. And I think it resonated with the audience, right? All of a sudden a short, much more consumable event existed. But we were still battling this stereotype, right? I'm sure if you ask anyone who is attending this event, this will most likely be their depiction of anyone who plays video games, right? At no fault of anyone other than that is just what we've been told. So we spent a long time kicking it off with Astralis, working with local press, international press, trying to change this narrative. On the left, Pizza and Coke is holding esports back. That was the type of news we were used to getting, right? Fast forward, after a lot of work, a lot of attention put into trying to push the right stories in the right medias, Astralis is losing and have a much more complicated way to the Blast final. All of a sudden, it's in the sports section, it's covered like anything else, like Chelsea playing in Champions League, no difference, and it's talking about the journey in a tournament that they don't have to over-explain, right? And that's where we're at today, which has been one of the big feats that we've achieved. But we're also in a tricky ecosystem, because if you look at traditional sports, football is a good example on the left side. No one really owns the game, right? We can make a football tournament if we wanted to, invite people to play, and they could come and play, right? You'd still be hit by something eventually when the big kahunas south in Europe want to have a part of it. But until then, you could do it. And the value kind of exists more when you're talking leagues, broadcast rights, teams, that whole purple box that you see there on the left. There's some free-to-watch things on YouTube, but the fans are generally okay with the setup, right? In esports, completely different. The value is flipped upside down. We start with the ones who own the games. So us, a tournament organizer, who've built an entire league ecosystem where the slots in our ecosystem is worth several million euro to own, but we don't own the game. We have no stake in the game. So they could, theoretically, change their game completely, lose an entire player base, and then our ecosystem would be dead. And we would have no way to control that, right? That is the kind of risk that exists in esports that is unique to anywhere else. So this layer that you see in the middle on the right, with teams, us in Blast Premier, ESL, our colleagues in Germany further south, TV2 who buys our rights every single year to show it, on par with all the other big sporting events, that dynamic has shifted completely. We're all trying to survive based on what those who develop the games do, right? And again, the broadcast rights, you're used to paying. If you're using a service here in Denmark, you'll be paying Viaplay, a lot of money to get football rights, or TV2, others where you want to watch the sport that you enjoy. Our fans, they expect it all to be free. On YouTube, on Twitch, they even get annoyed when we put ads before you get to see the show. It's also frustrating. That's one of the only places we actually make money in that little ecosystem. So we're quite reliant on sponsorship, broadcast rights, so selling the broadcast rights to the likes of TV2 here in Denmark. That's a big thing, and that helps us a ton, right? Because all of a sudden, we can begin changing some of these dynamics. Yes, we'll put it on YouTube and Twitch, we'll make them happy, but it won't be what drives it all. We have to figure out a way where the fans can also ultimately end up having to pay for some of it, right? So an interesting ecosystem that we exist in. The setup that we built, and what I believe is our strengths, is what you see on the left. We found this magic trifecta of esports, creativity, and then a very high level of technological experience. And that's in the broadcast realm, right? So we're dealing with, if you think of a football match, you have a football pitch, players, a ball, point some cameras at it, almost job done. It's not super hard to figure out how to get that to a finished broadcast product, right? When we do our tournaments, we're dealing with tons of complexities. The field that the players are playing on, the ball, all of this is digital, which means that we have so much more that we need to be able to control at all times, right? They play on a server. Sometimes that's online. Sometimes it's locally. Another detachment. And the whole production just breaks apart like that, making it a complete behemoth to try to build from a technological point of view. We have some of the most advanced technological setups, even beyond what TV2 and Denmark's radio are doing here in Denmark. Other big broadcasters are doing, because we have such specific requirements, because our technological needs are so extreme. So that all of that coming together is kind of what have built the company that is Blast today, and what has helped us quite a lot. Many are also surprised about the structure of our team. Most think, and this is back to the heritage point I made in the beginning, that you have to find people who's been here long enough, and if you've been in eSport 15 years, that's great. To us, it was the opposite. Almost meant you were a little bit tainted, because you're probably stuck in a mindset that's very hard to get you out of, right? And that's what we wanted to break with. And that's also why the composition of our team pretty much looked like this. A huge pile of people that come from all walks of life that add a lot of value. Esports, pretty small. Sports, pretty small. Entertainment, fairly large, right? And the reason for that is when we sit down and design these shows, these spectacles, everyone can come up with a good idea. And it sounds cliche and stupid, but it's reality. If you build an environment where it's a safe zone to come up with whatever you could think of, we could probably implement it and make it work. And that's kind of how we built Blast from the ground up. So what that then looks like is a unique design. That was important to stand out in a pretty crowded environment where all of eSport looked the same. So we knew we had to get a distinct look. When people see the Blast stage for the first time, when they see it for the second time, it has to be instantly recognizable. It has to look different than anywhere else you would go for esports. So that was the first key pillar. We knew that players had to be in focus. We have to let them drive the show, much like any other sport. Some of us will probably remember the commentators from a certain football match we loved, but it's the players that we truly look towards, follow, right? It's the game we follow, the matchups, all those things. Similar here. Players will always be in focus, and that is where we try to put all our attention and build from. But most importantly, and where I think we have a slightly different approach than traditional sports, we put fans even above that. You have to build an experience that is in tune with the way that the fans consume. And I'm sure you've seen it with kids you may have, friends, maybe even your own behavior. Our attention spans are crazy now, right? People can only focus for a minute maybe, even this talk is an hour. That seems a little bit crazy if you probably ask a teenager today. And similarly, when we do these productions, we have to make sure every single moment something has to happen that make you excited. Watching a football match, 90 minutes, I grew up with football, I like it. My daughter doesn't like it, she finds it boring, right? Because nothing happens. It could be 90 minutes with nothing, that's crazy. So that we also have to take into account. We're dealing with this group of youth that are tuning into these events are the ones that would steer away from traditional entertainment because it's too long form, too much for the parents, the old timers, all of us who have grown up watching shows in that way. So that has to mean that we have to be hyper diligent to make sure that the show is tailored for them. So we built shows, we traveled the world. To the left, that's where we took our Counter-Strike IP. That's a big circuit. Think Formula One. That's pretty much what we've created. Teams exist within an ecosystem. They play versus each other. Big conclusion at the end of the year. We've since moved into other games, and that was one of the big shifts for us as a company. We had made everything that we'd built in Counter-Strike, an ecosystem, a game that we love, which we had a passion for coming into it. We didn't know if any of this translated to any other game. That was an hypothesis up until we did it. So we began digging into other games and found that this method actually works. We just try to be super aware of the game, keeping that authentic, building experiences that resonate with that audience, but maybe also push them a little bit beyond what they probably expect or would want. That works. And that is why we've since done everything competitively for Fortnite, one of the biggest games on the planet. We'll be bringing that to one of the biggest arenas in Denmark later this year, Counter-Strike, Rainbow Six, in a unique partnership where our brand is tailored together with the game's brand, first of a kind in the world, and again just shows what happens when you build a brand that actually resonates with the audience, right? Then the game developers actually care about your brand all of a sudden, want to associate with your brand, and that's what we tried to achieve from the beginning. And as you can see, spread across the world, we tried to deliver in the same way that any big broadcaster out there would receive the Olympics, the Super Bowl, Champions League games. We knew that we had to deliver on that level to be taken serious, right? The first time there's a breakdown, they will just cut the connection, they want their money back, and they'll never show it again, right? That's the world we kind of operate in when you're dealing with big broadcasters. So we took that seriously, built a system, an infrastructure that was built for esports, but ready to be taken out into the world through linear channels and all these big broadcasters from all over the world. But we had another challenge. Big challenge is, where do people actually go to consume things, right? And when I say people, I mean our audience. Our audience is the young demographic. It's 15 to 25-year-olds. It's what every big brand on the planet dreams about reaching. It's everyone that's hard to get to tune in. We somehow manage that with what we've built, right? But we're struggling because you have Twitch. You'll go Twitch to watch weird streamers eating at some small little restaurant somewhere on the other side of the world, watching someone play a game, or even a hot tub live stream, as you can see there when it gets really weird. You go on YouTube to find tutorials, to watch food videos, cat videos, other fun stuff, and esports, right? Then you go to Twitter to see rich people arguing with each other, or just a lot of weird stuff that you didn't really sign up for, but hey, I'm here anyway, right? And you're getting some news out of it. Esports as well. So we always knew that we had a challenge with where things lived, and we wanted to solve that. So we tried building, and have begun building, our own platform where people can come and view in a different way. And what we knew was that, okay, attention span is a challenge. They want to lean in. Not everyone is able to join us in an arena. In Copenhagen, that's 10,000 seats. That won't be able to fit anyone who wants to come. What can we do for those who are sitting at home, want to take part, want to impact the show itself, right? So we began building that platform. We knew that we wanted to make sure that these super long events, they're hard to digest, they're hard to see. What you see in the bottom with all these small icons, that's a highlight bar. You come in, you're maybe on hour 7 of the tournament. You can now jump seamlessly around back into the experience earlier in the day. All of a sudden, you've not lost anything, and you're fully up to speed, right? So we're already beginning to solve some of the pain points that an esports viewer typically has. We also knew that they want to have fun. And the more memey and weird it can be, the better it is, right? Great, we have a show match. Every big tournament, before the grand final, you do a little weird match where you have a lot of fun and you can let the reins go. That's what we did. So we built on the platform for everyone who's sitting at home, they could change the entire show match, how it was played, who was playing, and how the game itself even worked. So what you see up here is everyone sitting at home voting on the platform to throw a smoke bomb on the main stage inside Royal Arena in one of the booths where the teams are playing, right? It's ridiculous. It's also kind of fun. And everyone who sat at home found it fun, right? They also activated a sixth player. You play 5 versus 5 in Counter-Strike, also in the show match. But all of a sudden, a sixth player opportunity appeared. They voted for it. Who came out? A big show sequence, and Nicolas Estrup, professional footballer, came out, was the sixth player, joined the team on stage. Again, it's silly, it's fun, it's lighthearted, but you from home decided how all of this should transpire, right? All of a sudden connecting everyone together in a way that traditional sports has never been able to do. But we also knew that this is a very tricky market, right? You're dealing with Twitch, YouTube, a lot of big powerhouses when it comes to just consumption, and especially in this demographic. So we knew we don't have a lot of avenues we can take because that will cost us a lot of money. And we have a runway, we have to survive until we get more money in to extend that runway, right? Like any other company. So what we did was, in Counter-Strike, there's something called a major. Think of it as the World Cup. The way that works in Counter-Strike is that you can put a bid as a tournament organizer in for a major. That works the exact same way as it does with the World Cup. Hey, we would like to take the World Cup, the major in this case, to this city. We have a great idea. The event is going to be cool. It's going to look like this. And then the game developer, like I mentioned, sitting on top of it all, decides who gets to hold this World Cup, right? We thought, great, this might be our only chance to try to get a big enough splash, again, just to push towards this platform, a new viewing experience. And that's the avenue we took. So we could see that the fans wanted it. We'd never really bid on a major to try to let the fans build the hype of them wanting us to have a major because of the things we've become known for. And all of a sudden, the French president went out and talked about esports as a strategy. Pretty political, probably. Try to engage that demographic as well in ways he can, right? But we tapped into that. So we talked to Macron and his staff, figured out what if we brought the major to Paris? Would you want to be part of that? And luckily, he was excited and he wanted to be part. So we won the major. That was step one. Great. The game developer decided, you get it. But Macron also wanted to be part of it. He wanted to announce it. Again, that's probably part of his political strategy, right? But it also helps us. It helps us get one of the biggest political figures in the world to talk about our event coming to Paris, all to push this platform, right? We've named it the Blast TV Major. It's what everyone will remember and see. So that was a huge piece of how we tried to think marketing strategy different than just traditional push to push ads. We could have done that on Twitch, YouTube, but we wanted to take another path. Let me just get some water. So what about the future? What does that hold? I promise I'm almost on the verge.
No, take your time.
Okay, great. So some of the observations that we're seeing is there's an interesting shift happening. What you will probably remember as being, okay, now I care about esport as well, I'll kind of fit it in. I watch some football games here on the weekends, I play a bit with the friends here, do something else. But now, people's plate are full. There's too much to engage with. We're no longer battling with other esports competition. We're battling for your time when you're sitting down to watch Netflix, to watch a football game, to buy tickets for a concert. All of that is direct competition, right? And that was important. And we can see the behavior change as well. People are no longer finding time for esport, they're just taking time from something else. We probably see that if you look at graphs showing traditional sports, pretty big decline. It's not looking great. Need to do a lot of action, I think, in the traditional world to change that, right? But we're kind of seeing that shift towards us. People are just moving attention away, right? Go to where you're stimulated. We can also see that where normally we would go to seek inspiration from traditional productions like NBA and other places, the opposite is now happening. I was talking about some of the complexities that we're dealing with on a broadcast level. The traditional world is now coming to us to see how we've solved some of these things, how we're pushing simple equipment to the limits and delivering broadcasts differently. We're also pushing the boundaries of what is the next level of entertainment when it comes to graphics, productions, everything that you're used to when you're seeing a television show from home, all of that will change. And then one of the big ones, for most of you here, if you know esports, you probably also think of it more as pop culture by now. But I think there's still a lot of people seeing it as a subculture, right? And I think that's a norm that is also going to be a humongous shift that's just upon us. If you still think it's a subculture, then you have to get on the wagon and know that it's pop culture, because it is. And I think everyone knows it, everyone who watches it knows it. So I think that's one of the big shifts that we see as well. And then how we're trying to then push some of these boundaries is through, like I said, more engagement. We want people to lean in more. What we've done today is updated that in-game viewing experience. We've changed how our game behaves to make it easier to consume. We've become multidisciplinary. You saw the images, the big GIFs of all these shows. It's a spectacle, right? That took time to perfect. We've stayed authentic, yet inclusive. So we've acknowledged there's a legacy that we kind of have to respect, but we've pushed the boundaries respectfully, right? And then these superior aesthetics, you all know it. If you watch football, the Champions League music when it plays, the banner when it waves, all of these are just rituals that have been encoded in our heads that evokes an emotion when it happens, right? The exact same path we've taken with music that we've composed, the show we've designed, the stage, etc. Similar thematics. But tomorrow, what waits there is even bigger, right? You have augmented reality. The shift before we're all going to be sitting with headsets on, the inevitable future that's probably going to hit us, a lot will happen in between. And a lot of that will come from workflows optimizing. When you see a television production today, it's rows and rows of people. All of that we're beginning to slim down because automation helps. A lot of these game engines that we actually now do television productions in is what is going to change everything. Mixed reality will be a big one. And then wearable player tech, right? You see football, it's easy to understand. Someone is sliding on their knees after having scored a goal. I understand that emotion, right? I can tap into it. But it's hard with a video game. You have people with headsets on, looking into a screen. Yes, they'll celebrate, but it's still very hard to evoke the emotions and follow what the players are doing. So we're working with wearable tech companies to figure out what can we take data-wise from players while being respectful of their health data, but then change that into something that can get us all to understand what are the players feeling at this moment in time, right? And then broadcast gamification, you saw the show match, how we've tried to change it all, and that is in essence, I think, what is going to be the future of entertainment. You're all probably doing it right now. It doesn't take much when you're watching anything to take your phone out, do something else on a second screen, on a third screen. I'm sometimes insane and have 4 screens because I don't even know. There's just so much stimulation. And I think that is the world that we're slowly edging towards as well, right? So we have to force people in, force focus back to a singular point at all times. And that's what we're trying to achieve as well. That was everything from our presentation point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I obviously have arranged for questions, but I really hope as well if any of you guys have anything, please pop your arm in the air, and then we can then I'll jump down to you with the microphone. Yeah, let's go ahead with that. No, hold on. I would like to have a microphone because we're recording everything, so I would like to have a microphone on it.
You're getting recorded as well. Yeah.
No.
Can you tell me how do you choose the host cities, the locations?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. So I think it goes through pretty much the same as other big events will do. So let's say we're putting on a big show here in Copenhagen. It's a bit of a crown jewel. We know it looks great. We know it's completely packed. What we do there is fly in all the different cities that we're talking to. They all have representatives. We all know wonderful Copenhagen here. So a lot of similar type structures elsewhere in the world. So we fly all of them in, show them around, show them the spectacle, what it is that we can bring to their city. And then I think what we also try to do is demand a bit more in the other way. So I think when you look at traditional events here, I think Tour de France happening in Copenhagen is probably the perfect example of something descending on a city, right? And the city being taken over by it. We're always limited to being in an arena. That's just a challenge of how we operate. So we try to figure out which cities are actually open to, doing the same. How can we impact as much of the city as possible? And even more so, how can we make it more affordable to go somewhere in the world, right? So we often try to juggle cities that have good rebate schemes where we can get some tax deductions because we bring a big show in. And there's a lot of different variables to why we go to a certain city. But some of the key ones to begin with is there an audience that could be big or small? It could be legacy or up and coming. All these things we have to take into account, right? It's very uphill if you go to a city where no one really plays your video game. It's a bit different with big international sports, right? Most people know basketball, soccer, et cetera, et cetera. But with esports, it's harder. Every single game could have as small an area as one country in Europe that likes it, one that doesn't play it at all. And that's some of the hardest to kind of juggle. So that's where we lean on our own knowledge and game knowledge, essentially, to also guide us a little bit.
But Nicolas, when you talk about that you had this event in Paris, for instance, normally when we play soccer, it's on a standardized football match, football playing field. When you play basketball, ice hockey, it's the same area you play, no matter where you are. Would it be possible to Macron, for instance, to say, hey, I want to have a map that contains Champs-Élysées, for instance, and would you be able to make that just to make him happy and to make the event actually take place in Paris?
If he wanted that, we could definitely make it. But I think it would probably be a risky one to make. And I think that is obviously where show matches, some of these more fun elements, is like a great place to use for this kind of activities. We've done it before where we've built different maps that are on high rises, resembling cities that we're going to, paying a bit of like a tip of the hat to the city. So I think it's all up to how much the city want to invest. We've even had talks with architectural firms like Big here in Denmark about could we do something together, because you can actually take a Counter-Strike map and one of the files they use to make big buildings and merge them together, and then you have a map that's playable. So I think all of that is luckily possible with Counter-Strike as a game. So we definitely could. I think the problem is I wish everyone were braver and wanted to like lean into that level, but I think that's hard. But we could if we wanted to.
But what would the team say? Saying, hey, now for this tournament, we're introducing a new map.
That would not work. So I think that's where there's quite a big religion for the teams, where the game is played on a set amount of maps that change out sometimes. But that's, again, the game developer that decides. But that's the holy, if you will, part of the game, right? So if we were to make Macron's Champs-Élysées map, that would have to be something that is played outside of the main tournament. But the beauty kind of is taking, and that's what we found, some of these show matches, when you take pro players who've been knocked out of the tournament, but put them on a map that's silly, weird, fun, slightly hard to play still, then you see some of the craziest moves and in-game things ever, right? Because it's someone that's so comfortable in a game doing things they would never do in a competitive match where they're very serious. So that's kind of the fun elements. But no, you're right. It would be uproar, and I think I would be chased out of the arena with pitchforks if I were to try to implement something like that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. The first is about, I think you are mostly focused in CSGO. Like, are you thinking to approach other video game as a way to, to diversify, to come into, new revenue streams with other publishers?
100%. And I think, this idea of putting all our eggs in one basket, and one basket being Counter-Strike owned by one company, right? It's too high risk. Simply. So even though we have good contracts with them to run our tournaments, that is what we're focusing on. So I think lately and this weekend in Forum in Copenhagen, a big, beautiful venue as well, we'll be doing a Rainbow Six event, another shooter-style game that I'm sure you know as well. And we've even built an ecosystem together with the game developer there, right? So we're doing that. We're doing Fortnite. We've done the Premier League FIFA version in England as well as another good example. So that's 100% in our vision as well, right? But I think it's a tricky one, because at what point do you become a white label company that does productions on behalf of the game developers? And at what point can we inject our IP, the triangle, everything we're trying to achieve into it, right? So this partnership with Ubisoft, one of the largest game developers in the world, and Rainbow Six, where we actually blend our two logos and have created that ecosystem together, that's the future we're more excited by, because then all of a sudden we're beginning to build legacy about our brand, right? Then we might have big partnerships that are exciting because of other things that are purely white label, but it is this branded play that is definitely the most exciting, and the more diversified, the better, for sure.
And do you see the publishers trying to jump into the event organization, or like do you see it as a risk? Do you see it's going to happen at some point?
Who is going to question? So, can you repeat the question?
The publishers, the video game companies.
Well, I think what has kind of happened over the past couple of years is actually the reverse. So if you look at big game developers like Riot, they have League of Legends, Valorant, another shooter game. They've actually taken an approach to begin with where they consumed it all, right? They did everything themselves. Still do quite a lot themselves, but even them are beginning to think about maybe we shouldn't necessarily produce everything that we do ourselves. Let's maybe, let's work with these guys over here to do it, because that saves them a ton of money in people they don't have to hire and have on staff. And for us, it's a perfect opportunity. So we're actually seeing the opposite, and it's similar with Epic Games, who has Fortnite, Rocket League, and other games. Similar type of change in mindset, where they're actually more thinking about how much do we feel okay letting go and having someone operate, maybe even under their own banner, versus taking it over. But again, it's always a risk, right? You can reach a future where they get excited by owning it all and running it all, and then that might shift. But for now, it's actually the opposite that's kind of the trend.
And last question, when you organize in any given city, the cities look at this more of a way to connect with their locals, with their citizens, or to attract as well tourism? Because I don't know, I feel like with your target group, like the purchasing power maybe is not that high for them to travel in as a, let's go to Paris, to a major. So I don't know if the cities look at this as a way of more of engaging with the local communities rather than let's bring international tourism to raise occupation in hotels and so on.
It's a little bit of both. So I think we've both experienced cities, and I think US is a good example, where if we're doing an event in Los Angeles, it's a bit of a long shot to think that a lot of people from Europe is going to make that journey, right? There it's more about activating pretty regionally, and I think it's similar other places we've been in the US. I think in Europe, people are much more prone to traveling. So I think Paris is a good example of reason why we picked Paris was that pretty central in Europe. It's a beautiful city. It's one of the big ones, if we can call it that. I think that's fair. Actually means that people do want to travel. So there we are seeing a higher rate of people who want to travel. So a big question mark, and that's one of the strange things about esports, I'm sure you'll know as well. You hear the commentators in the arena when the games are being played. Imagine how strange that would feel at a soccer match if the same thing happened. But that's normal in esports. So that was a big question for Paris, where we were bombarded with questions about, is it French commentary? Is it English? Because people wanted to make the trip, right? So it all comes down to cities. And even Copenhagen being a good example, there it's even been a focus that, yes, it's good, we satisfy youth who want to buy tickets, but it can also be completely left field type targets we want to try to hit, like activating Copenhagen as a city to come educate yourself in. We help do that through wonderful Copenhagen and other paths as well, to try to get people to move here and study here, which is obviously a bit of a strange side track to build onto it. So we're kind of always flexible to try to help the city with what they're trying to achieve, and we just want to fill an arena and try to create a bit of a lasting legacy. So sometimes it's like a win-win for both.
Okay, last question, because otherwise, what's your biggest revenue stream? Like ticketing, sponsoring, like what's the ranking of your revenue stream?
I think it's pretty much sponsorships and broadcast rights is like on a shared number one for sure, and then tickets immediately underneath. And those are the biggest ones pretty much, right? And that is because we're not getting anything out of Twitch and YouTube that has, yes, sure, when you look at it on a balance sheet, that's fine, like it's good to have, but it doesn't change the world for our company, right? Because of the way that their ad models work, it's just not super exciting. So that is why that is the big pillars for us, for sure. And another reason why long term, if we build out this platform where people can go instead to watch, engage, have meet and greets virtually with the players that are on site, you from home, all these extra things that you might be excited by as a fan, maybe you'll pay for that one day or pay for no ads at all, and then that's a small fee, right? Those type of things I think could become, pillars of the future for sure, but tricky with the climate.
Thank you, Doug.
Of course.
But if your content is available free for everybody at YouTube, why should I pay money to watch it on TV2 or some of the other platforms that host it?
So TV2 is a good example, I think, where they've almost bought our rights from day one. And what they do is, we do our show, it's in English. We have experts on an analyst desk, as it's called, much like a sports TV studio where they break down the matches. We have the same in English going out on YouTube and Twitch. TV2, they build their own setup. So with Danish specialists. So if you watch regionalized television from NBA or NFL or big soccer matches, every little regional, production has their own setup, their own hosts, and everything is in the native language, right? And I think that is kind of the play that is making the broadcast rights, interesting. And then we can see quite a large part, even of like hardcore esport viewers, that if they already have that membership for TV2 as an example, and could go and watch it in English, sometimes they actually prefer just hearing it, in a more native tongue than necessarily switching to English all the time. I do also think that there's pretty big value in this slightly communal feel you can build. When it's someone that you feel are your peers that are talking about something, it becomes like your little thing together. You appreciate those hosts differently. I think the same is happening in Danish television and everywhere else as well. So they definitely provide something that we can't provide, because we're the big polished show in English that you go see if you just want like the razor straight show that is clean cut.
But your world seems very complex because you have players that play the game, you have the game developers that develop the game, and you have fans, and you have arenas where you have to sell tickets in. How much do you communicate with those different stakeholders? Because there must be many stakeholders that you need to take into consideration for almost everything that you do.
Oh, tons. And I think it all comes down to trying to go back to cities consistently. I think, again, Copenhagen is a good example where now we've built up the event to a degree where we don't really do any marketing for it. It's minimal what we put out in cities, ads, etc. Normally, big events will spend big money on doing that. So I think we're quite fortunate in having come back a lot of times. I also think esports is a little bit strange because if you're a hardcore esports fan, you'll follow a lot of people on Twitter. You'll kind of find information. Even here at lunch, I was sitting and talking about esports, and no one really even knew that the event was happening in Copenhagen later this year. But I'm sure it'll sell out anyway, right? Because the right people find the right information. So I think that's also one of the challenges where we probably have to shift tactics a little bit to open it up, but where we're also fortunate in that once that legacy is built, you can kind of, juggle it in that way. Everything else is very complex, and I think that is why figuring out which city to go to is a huge question. Because every time we make that choice, right, we have to take into account where's the players going to travel in from? What's the latest event before us? Is this a reasonable ask to get them to fly across the world? If they're somewhere else, that's only on a team level, right? Then you have sponsorships. Are there certain rights we can't do? Alcohol, betting, everything changes whichever country we go to, right? So yeah, it's a minefield. Sounds like something bad is going to happen when you walk down it. It's not. It's not that. Let's just say it's a tightrope that we're trying to walk, and it's definitely tricky.
You said yourself that your community might be a little bit closed around itself. When I look at some of the sports that are evolving quite heavy right now, it's a game like paddle, for instance. It's evolving because it's quite easy to follow and it's easy to play when you begin with it. First time I saw one CSGO match on television, the first half an hour I didn't understand anything of it because you have your own lingo, you have everything so very close around yourself. Are you giving it some thoughts on how to open it up more to be more attractive to other target users than just the 15 to 25 years old that we saw were heavy users on your product?
100%, and I think that's the approach we had from day one. So when we came into the scene, if you will, the core audience thought we were a circus. They thought we were crazy, ridiculous, because we changed the format. We made it so tight, it didn't really feel like a competition anymore. But that was for that reason, to try to get it to a point where everyone can follow, right? So that was on a construct level. We also tried to do it from a design perspective, being the game, when you play it, will look a certain way. The players need to see the game in that way. But we can change everything about the game when you see it as a viewer. So all that information that might not be relevant to you, we can remove. Make sure you only see the right things at the right time. And then I think we try to work quite a lot with our broadcast talent, like commentators and others, to try to remember that not everyone has the same knowledge that you do, right? Take people by the hand and, walk us through what it is you're doing, even though you feel like you're dumbing yourself down, right? It'll help someone else who's watching. So we've tried, and that is what gave us quite a lot of ridicule in the beginning, but I think people have gotten used to now, and others have began copying. So yeah, but it's an uphill battle. A game will always be complex to understand in the beginning, right? And that is the trickiest thing. I think what we like about games like Counter-Strike and what we try to work with are those that have quite clear lines you can draw to other sports. So I think if you've ever seen a beautiful goal in soccer, if you've seen a dunk in basketball or a beautiful three-point shot, we can all acknowledge that that is a good sports performance, right? It looks impressive. I think luckily in some of these games, when you have big moments like that, you do understand when one person takes down an entire opposing team, that feels otherworldly, right, in a skill level sense. So I think we do have some of those, but the more we can try to emphasize those and make you understand what just happened, the better. But it's tricky because video games are complex.
Cool. We have a question more from the audience.
Yeah. Sorry. Mads, working at the DJI, working with the grassroots of esports, so to speak, the local clubs and the communities around that. So I was just curious, as you're representing one of the general stakeholders in esports in general, the professional tournament organizers, which are special at some points because a lot of the general the tournament organizers is somewhat different in esports, because a lot of the big tournaments can also be available for amateurs to participate in. Yours is a bit different because it's mostly invitational tournaments, from my understanding. This might be a tricky question for you to answer, but what is earlier this year the Olympic series of esports was pronounced, and we saw this seemingly random mix of archery, chess, baseball, games that might for people people with the lack of knowledge of what esports is, it might be easier to understand. But as one of the key stakeholders in this topic, what is your point of view on that move from the Olympic series?
I think the Olympics is a tricky one, right? And I can kind of understand the thought process they've probably gone through to end up making the decision that they made, right? Because I think if even from a non-purist view, just if you think about what is actual esport titles that are moving the big numbers, that are where people tune in, right? It's obviously not the ones they've picked. And I think that could kind of be because of two things, right? One could be you're dealing with game rights. You know, I showed a slide before where the game publishers sit on all the power. That's just a circumstance. Maybe they couldn't agree. I don't know. But it definitely seems strange to not have any of the, let's call it the big 3 or 5 or however many they are. And I think that could be one reason. The other could be if you're the Olympic Committee, right? And we've seen this as esport before, that we're seen as violent, as being a path into becoming more violent in your day-to-day, right? Where I think they're sometimes disregarding that people are punching each other in the face at boxing at the Olympics. That to me feels a little bit more violent. So I think the stigma of esport still exists, right? So I could imagine when the Olympic Committee sits and looks at games like Counter-Strike, people are shooting each other. There are bombs that are exploding, if you take it at face value, right? That can be a tricky decision to make versus taking a slightly smaller, easier step like they've done now, which I can kind of understand why they did, where you're taking sports that you know, like shooting a bow and all these other things, and made them digital. That feels to me like a very comfortable first step that doesn't feel super risky and dangerous. That's what I think kind of led them down this path. Hope and aspiration, of course, would be that one day we can see the, let's call it the true esports, for now at least. Maybe all these games are going to become mega. I slightly doubt it, but who am I to say? But I think that's my perception. So I think hopefully over the years they'll lean into it, become bolder in their choices, less afraid about making the right choices, I think, if they truly want it to be esports.
Previously, you talked a little bit about the beauty of sport, and I think that everybody can agree on whenever a goal in a soccer match, that, oh, that was a beautiful goal. Or when someone runs really fast, oh, that's nice to see, and that's an aesthetical move or something like that. But your world is a bit different. So how do you feel about people, oh, that was a very beautiful kill? It was really nice to see him get splattered all over the area. That's a bit different from what we normally talk about when we talk about sport.
Right. Luckily, at least, what we hear less is that, wow, he splattered all over all over that wall. And I think that's it's a good thing that you comment on, because I think it's one of the misconceptions of who is sitting in an arena buying a ticket to go see a show like ours, where people are getting shot on screen, right? And that is the sport happening. I think back to the Olympic Committee conversation as well. I think there's a misunderstanding in that, why are people going to watch, right? And I think the sports performance in an esports sense is a team that you follow. We have our Ronaldos, our Messis in our world that all the young ones look up to, and they're the good players. And I'm pretty sure if you asked anyone in the arena, none of them there would say, I'm just here for the headshots. I'm here for seeing people getting killed on screen, and I just want to drink a beer while doing it, right? That never happens. It's families. We see kids who's even too small to be in the arena with these little things on, like at festivals. It's a family affair, and I think it's because people do see it as sport. So they're not seeing blood on a wall or a bomb exploding. They're seeing big plays happening in a tactical sense or in a skill level sense, right? So that's why I think reaction time and how everything is set up. Some of these teams have strategic books that are like an NFL team. It's a thick folder with things they have to memorize because it's called out by their team captains, right? So there's so many mechanics to this that you kind of dig into when you begin to understand the complexities more. So yes, at face value, I think everyone will think that that is why people go to the arena, but reality is just that they go there to support their team. So for the same reason why, no one at soccer games is saying, I'm just here to see how hard the balls are going to get kicked, right? That wouldn't happen either.
And another thing that comes to my mind is that when I watch a soccer game, for instance, we have there's always discussions whether that ball was in or out across the line and stuff like that. Your world is entirely digital, meaning there must be a lot of different ways for players, for game developers to build in some cheat codes and stuff like that. How do you look at that from an organized point of view?
So I think there's tons of complexities that go into when a team arrives, the equipment that they have with them, what they're playing on, how they're playing, things like internet access. No players have that when they're sitting on stage because then they could download files. We limit everything that they do. The equipment that they have comes through us, so we check everything meticulously. Anything could potentially be hidden in a keyboard, in a mouse that they're plugging in and bringing with them around the world, right? So all of that we kind of have structures set up to deal with. So there's the in-game cheat, if you will, where you could get superpowers of sorts within the game, hide that and then win. It's less of an issue on let's call it the highest tier of play because of all these mechanisms we have installed that they go through. It's almost like arriving at an airport, getting all your stuff scanned. It's similar to that we try to make sure that we take that seriously. And then there's also the doping element, right? Where I think a lot will probably be surprised to know that we've had doping expert visits several times, doing testing, because we're a part of a coalition as well, right? To not have doping in esports. They're not looking for power or strength or speed to gain anything, but focus, right? If you can calm yourself down and focus on one thing, that makes you better. So I think there's both the in-game element that we control by making sure no internet, all the equipment that they're using have been rigorously gone through, and then there's the doping element as well, and that to us feels like we're covering all the bases.
So now you've been in the business for around 6-7 years, started in 2016, if I remember correctly what you told me earlier. How do you see the next steps in your journey? When we talk together in 7 or 8 years, how will the world look then, and how will your company look like, and what will you be heading at that time?
Well, I think if we follow the kind of trajectory that we see now, right, then I think viewership-wise, it's clear that, like I mentioned earlier, people are taking time away from things, spending it on esports, right? That'll plateau eventually until things just begin picking up, right? We have a pretty good set amount of games right now that are what's being played. I think they'll dominate for the next many years. There'll always be other games that begin to pop up, ecosystems that begin existing. But it feels over the years as if we have some games now that are carrying a lot of, let's call it the esports industry on their shoulders. I think they'll continue to do that. So I think viewership will increase. I think there'll be a higher demand for how you watch, where you watch, what you can do when you're watching, what's the differentiation. I think you will probably see ecosystem maybe not shrink, but I think maybe combine each other more. I think we're struggling a little bit in esport in some ecosystems with, there's a lot of operators. We're one. There's other that are also doing tournaments with the same teams that we have. That's the strange thing for a fan to try to understand, right? And where do I follow? So I think that'll probably be something that over time I could imagine would also be looked at. And I hope that we can change, right? But that would require very big companies working together with things they feel very, very fondly about. So I think that's a tricky one. But that's definitely a wish and a desire. And then I think personally, this future we're looking into where we're beginning to also play more than just on a computer, right? Everything is changing, how we're playing, engaging. We're kind of laughing at it now when someone has a VR rig at home and are playing games. I think that is the future, when equipment gets cheap enough and we all get it, and kids in school begin using it to fly to the Taj Mahal or wherever they want to go in school to see something. When that begins to normalize, I think that gaming and esports push that's going to go with it, it's going to be a whole new ecosystem unfolding. So that's something I'm patiently looking and waiting for as well.
But the players that are playing esports, they're sitting, right now at least, they're sitting down in front of a computer and at a gathering like this, Idrætsmødet, we want everybody to be more physically active. We want people to go out in the Kildeparken and play some, excuse me, real sport. How do you combine those two things? Because obviously you need to be in a very good shape as well if you want to be a professional esport player.
Exactly, and I think that's, again, one of the big misconceptions and misunderstandings, right? Is that people sit at home on their computers, play tournaments, fly across the world, never really work out. And I think what we're seeing is clear that you actually need to be in quite good physical shape if you want to perform on a constant level. A lot of research was done to figure out what is actually the optimal esport athlete in structure and build and what you could do to your body, and found that it's actually one-to-one with a golfer. And the reason for that is both are playing very long tournaments where you don't want your blood sugar to ever spike too much because then you'll begin crashing, right? So all of a sudden you're dealing with a blood sugar that you want to keep pretty level. You have some peaks in what you're doing, if it's a golf swing or if you're playing at a very intense moment in time. So it's a much more mental game in that way that still requires you to be in quite good physical shape. So I think that's what we're seeing. And then like I think we were talking about as well, reaction time, all these things, where do we draw the line on what is activating your body, right? If you're activating your mind and you're becoming sharper reaction time-wise than some of the best fighter pilots in the world, I'd say that's pretty cool too, which also falls into the same bucket, right? So I think it is changing, but that will be a shift that I think will happen in esports as well. I think right now we're in this strange world where, if people remember back in early racing days, they were drinking alcohol, they were doing all these things where if you see that today in Formula One, people will be like, what the hell is going on? I think similarly in esports, we're in a bit of a junction where you have these, let's call it more future-like, players who are understanding that their bodies need to do certain things to perform better. And I think the more the youth picks up on that, I think it's going to be a whole wave of young players that are going to sweep all these older players away, right? Because we do have some of those that don't drink alcohol like in the old days, but maybe don't eat as healthy as they should, and they travel a lot, so I'm sure there's a lot of pity on themselves because it sucks and you want to eat a burger. So I think we still have this strange mix of everything, but I think that will change for sure as well.
I have one final question, and remember this is a close. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Thomas Hawke. I'm sorry I missed the entire presentation due to a car accident outside, and
Whoa.
I was sitting in a traffic jam. But I don't know, it's a follow-up question to this real sport versus electronic sport. Did you talk about hybrid sport events? Because I'm interested in this one. You see, from Germany, you see streamer doing real sport like football in Berlin and getting more and more people coming to real football events. You see hybrid events like football clubs are doing game day with one part of the team has to play esport and one part of the team has to play football on the pitch, and after the words they change the teams and they have to play again. And you see elements like the Kings League in Spain where you combine like really popular superstars in football, in real football, with Twitch streamers or YouTube streamers. How do you think about the future of these hybrid events, and did you organize something like this?
100% agree that is part of what we can all use as, I think, methods to try to normalize esports as well, gaming, streaming, all these things. I think in the past we've done things like in Sao Paulo, we did a big arena event. It was a Counter-Strike tournament that ran like all our tournaments ran. But then to tap into the streamer angle, we worked with one of the biggest Brazilian streamers. His name is Gaules. He has a very hardcore fan base. They're called La Tribunera, which has a slight hooligan type energy to them, but they're not violent. So we gave them their own section in the stadium, much like a hooligan section in an arena, where he would stream from and all his fans would be, and they would have different clothing and all this kind of stuff, right? And that's just one element of it. I think we're also working with streamers to come and set up where we are, do content before the event is happening, stream the event when it's happening, and try to just blend it all into one. And we're doing a big show in Copenhagen in Fortnite, where we'll be doing the same, where streamers will be engaging with the main broadcast and it'll all kind of blend in together, and that's for the exact same reason. So I think there's the element around streaming and how that can cross-pollinate fan bases, but I think a big one is like what you're talking about. We've done a lot of shoots with football players, West Ham and other big football clubs, where we do exactly the same, right? Play some soccer, play some Counter-Strike or another game like FIFA, and then we do some content about that. And I think for us that helps with, I think, just normalizing that esport is everywhere and all these big pro athletes in other sports play the same games and get excited, right? We're again also, Neymar was seen at a Counter-Strike tournament just a couple of weeks ago as well, and he's an avid Counter-Strike gamer. So I think the more everyone can tap into this type of cross-pollination, I think that will help mindset shifts in the I guess, general sphere around everything. Maybe some of the skeptics are going to be open to what esport is. So I think that's what we see it help with more than trying to build events around that. I think there's a lot of very smart talent agencies who are doing that kind of work with streamers and connecting them in the right way. And that, I think, is perfect. That seems like the perfect marriage, and we're always in full support.
Thank you. Time is up. I have one final question.
Okay.
And when you answer this question, I would like you to remember that this is a close and safe environment. So you can say
not recorded and shared with the world.
You can say whatever you want.
Okay, okay.
When you previously talked about you have a random smoke grenade, you have adding a sixth player and stuff like that. Have you ever in this process had an idea where you thought, hey, this is too stupid, this is too weird, we can't do it?
Yes, we had one, and I can tell you all this, because I'm sure you won't tell anyone else. And I just don't think it would ever really work. So in a show match, in Counter-Strike, we can change pretty much everything. We can change what a character looks like, what the walls look, whatever, what the weapons do. They can shoot flowers instead of bullets. We can do anything. So we wanted to try to do it. We might still do it, but I think it's going to be nearly impossible. We have an old legendary player who's called RPK. He's a French player, but he's often referenced to as the tank. So what we wanted to do in a show match was immediately in one round change him in the game from being a player to being an actual tank. That then instead of having 100 health points, he had 1,000 health points. It was unkillable. And then he would drive around as a tank on the map, which is obviously ludicrous. But I think we wanted to do it, but it just became a complete rights nightmare. Because we had to find someone who could build a tank, and it couldn't look like real tanks, because then the weapons industry would go crazy because there's licenses there. So I think that's the one where I'm like, that's a shame, because that would have been ridiculous. Yeah, I think. So that's one that got away for now, at least.
It is a very complex world.
It is.
Thank you very much for your time, Nicolas Estrup.
Thank you so much, everyone.
And thank you very much for joining.